MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin. He's also the publisher of TheBreaker.News, his website, TheBreaker.ca. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
An earthquake of sorts on the national political scene, or maybe it was expected by some. Maxime Bernier has pulled the plug on the Conservative Party of Canada, and there are hints that he may want to form his own political party. What's the background there?
Well, Maxime Bernier was the runner-up to Andrew Scheer in the leadership contest for the Federal Conservative Party, and Bernier never really truly accepted the results of that vote that was done across the country using technology and using a different weighted system. And we remember it went to multiple ballots, of course, before Andrew Scheer was finally chosen. And Maxime Bernier has made complaints in the months after that vote, complained that Andrew Scheer seemed to have garnered a lot of votes among the farmers, dairy farmers. There's been a lot of complaints over the years about the supply management system, and Maxime Bernier is not a proponent of that system, and he pointed to Andrew Scheer basically kowtowing to the dairy farmers, and that's where he got the votes that put him over the top. That's at least Maxime Bernier's theory on this. The problem is these leadership contests, whether they're federal or provincial and sometimes even municipal, they should be beyond reproach, but the problem is these parties tend to run them in-house. They might hire an auditing firm or some other company to make it appear that it's a neutral third-party overseer of the vote, but these really should be handled by the actual elections regulators, the statutory elections regulators. If it's federal, it should be Elections Canada. Provincial, it should be Elections BC. We saw something similar happen in British Columbia in 2011, when Christy Clark became the leader of the BC Liberal Party. Well, there was some mystery going on in the days and the day of. The vote PIN numbers were missed by people who were expecting to get PIN numbers, and we understand people got extra PIN numbers in order to make those votes, and we finally found out in early 2018 when there was a sentencing hearing for Brian Bonney, the BC Liberal operative. During that sentencing hearing, the special prosecutor talked about some of the evidence that was gleaned during the investigation, and that investigation touched upon the sale of Liberal memberships in 2011 and the Liberal leadership race itself, and he said that there was proxy voting with PIN numbers, and that's how Christy Clark eventually landed up as the premier. So coming back to the point is that Maxime Bernier could still be in the Conservative caucus today if there had perhaps been better integrity of the voting system, and by that I mean having a better overseer who could be beyond reproach, a better referee, and that referee would be Elections Canada. It's very possible that Maxime Bernier could have ended up leader if it had a different oversight. We just don't know, but he's been unhappy and restless within the Conservative caucus ever since then, and decided just within hours of Conservatives gathering in Halifax for the major convention of the party to leave the party himself, and looks like he's going to form his own party. This comes at an interesting time, just a little over a year before the October 2019 federal election. There's a lot of time between now and then, even though the time is wasting every day. It was famously said, Rafe Mayer said it, 6 weeks is an eternity in politics, and will this amount to anything? Will Maxime Bernier find others to support him, or will he be a party of one? Will there be others in caucus who might say they don't really have faith in Andrew Scheer to lead the party into the election? And will others defect? Or is this just a blip, and will Maxime Bernier be the proverbial disaffected party member pissing at the tent from outside the tent instead of staying inside the tent and pissing out? Because that's what political parties would rather have, is to keep the discontent inside the party instead of having those leave the party and be outside the party and piss at the tent. It's very embarrassing because he could leak some embarrassing information or say some embarrassing or critical things that get the Conservatives off their game and off their message. But then again, we've seen what's happened when parties have slowly but surely decided to change leaders very close to an election, and saw what happened to those parties. Most recently, the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party, they made a quick change late in the game with a few months left until the election, had their own leadership campaign, and surprised everyone when Doug Ford won the leadership, and surprised even more when he became premier. So we'll have to see if Bernier has other supporters, others from caucus, and others who are members who might want to leave the party, and others who are donors. For now, it looks like it's just a party of one.
Would this convention actually give him a good place to wander around and ask people if they're behind him?
Well, I don't think he's going to be invited to the
but he can hang out in front of the convention.
Oh, he'd probably do that, but he probably would have as many people, if not more people, kick him in the butt than pat him on the back after what he did. This doesn't do anything to really sow party unity. At a time when this party needs some unity and also needs perhaps better performance from its leader, Andrew Scheer, who doesn't seem to have lit the country on fire when it comes to support for the Conservatives, especially at a time when there have been months and months and months of Justin Trudeau foibles and mistakes and poor policy and planning. But Trudeau himself is taking a different tact. Earlier this summer, we saw them unveil a new strategy going forward, because Trudeau wants, of course, to become the second term. He wants to win re-election. Well, what they're trying to pin their hopes on is the anti-Trump sentiment, that Trudeau is essentially not running against Scheer and not running against Jagmeet Singh. He's running against Donald Trump, because they've done enough polling to understand that Canadians are as split about Trump as Americans are. There's some people that really, really do love him, but there's a lot of people that really don't love him, especially in these times of renegotiation of NAFTA, of softwood lumber, of trade tariffs. Trump is taking a hardline stance, and that G7 summit that happened in Quebec, that Trudeau was there at the press conference after Trump had left early, and Trudeau basically instantly said he was going to do whatever he can to represent Canada's interests. And then, of course, that ignited a firestorm, a war of words from across the border against Trudeau. And there were even some Conservatives who lined up behind Trudeau in support of Trudeau. James Moore, the former Conservative minister under the Harper administration, was one of those people who was very critical of Trump and very complimentary of Trudeau, and how Trudeau was seeming to stand up for Canadian interests and Canadian business at the time. So that really started off this new tact for Trudeau. They're trying to position him as someone who isn't the boy wonder anymore, but is someone who's Captain Canada, who's a mature leader, can perhaps be a statesman. Of course, there's a lot of holes we can poke in those arguments, but that's what the federal Liberals are going to be portraying Justin Trudeau as we approach the election, and why this does not come at a good time for the federal Conservatives to have a high-profile member, especially from Quebec, to decide to leave the tent and piss towards the tent.
Well, Bernier's split appears to be over immigration policies, and he may be buoyed by a new poll that shows 49% of Canadians believe there should be less immigration.
Well, immigration policies have been off and on for the last 40 years, if not 50 years, a hot-button issue. Going back to Pierre Trudeau and multiculturalism and bilingualism, these great ideals on which to build a modern nation going towards the 21st century. Well, here we are in the 21st century, and this is a country with a lot of problems. Justin Trudeau staked part of his election campaign in 2015 on bettering the lives of Aboriginals. Many Aboriginal reserves don't have clean running water like most Canadians enjoy. And so you do have that dynamic where Trudeau has been trying to position himself differently from Trump and issue worldwide welcomes and invitations to come to Canada via Twitter, for instance. And the world saw that. A lot of immigrants in the United States, some of them whose access to the United States was being closed by new Trump policies, decided to look to the northern border, especially people from Haiti, and flooded into the border in Quebec. And it's kind of overwhelmed provincial and municipal governments as well as the federal government, which has had to spend close to $150 million on dealing with this flood of immigrants and trying to come up with new words to describe them. Essentially, it is breaking the law to just cross the border into Canada. They're often called illegal immigrants, but the federal Liberals have called them irregular immigrants, and that's ignited a bit of a controversy and war of words with Conservatives. You've got to wonder about someone like Trudeau, who came to power trying to cast himself as a leader to unite, when in fact he's as divisive as anyone else he's tried to criticize over the years. Definitely, it is worth talking about. Maxime Bernier may have been a little bit extreme in his words, but this is a discourse that Canadians need to have, because we do need good immigrants to regenerate Canada. I mean, this is a country that is born on immigration. At the same time, we've got to make sure that those are the kind of people that are going to better the country, and the kind of people that are going to follow Canadian laws and, again, make it a better country. And of course, from different income brackets as well. Here we are in Vancouver talking about immigration on your show and talking about Quebec. Well, a lot of people took an interesting route from mainland China, for instance, to get to Vancouver. They actually went through Quebec, one of their immigrant investor programs, after the federal program was shut down. Well, Quebec has its own program, and some very wealthy people went through the Quebec program with no intention ever to settle in Quebec, but they wanted to get their way into Canada through making those investments through the Quebec program and wind up here in Vancouver. And of course, we've seen what's happened to our real estate market because of that. So Quebec has some things to answer about when it comes to immigration as well, not just the federal government. This is definitely worth talking about, but of course, as we know, when things get heated in the political arena, you do get some people with some extreme attitudes, but then you also get the politicians who just want to divide, and their main interest is not so much governing, but politicking on the way to an election. And this kind of discourse could get drowned out by false accusations of racism, when there are people who are from all cultures in Canada who are concerned about population in urban centers, for instance, about access to universities, about Canadian-born children who grow up to enter university, whether they'll be competing for seats in university with people who essentially are very wealthy from other countries who essentially buy their way into university, for instance. So this is a discourse that we'll be having on the way to the election next year. The federal Liberals, of course, have done whatever they can to increase the numbers. And have they done the increase in numbers the right way through actual evidence-based decision-making? Or do they increase the numbers of immigrants to be accepted by Canadians, by Canada annually, on the basis of essentially cultivating new voters for future elections? That's always been a question about the federal immigration policy. The Conservatives, when they went into power, they came into power with new ideas, but then again they fell into the same trap, because when you fall into power like that, you look for ways to stay in power or gain more power, And if it includes ethnic voting, well, political parties of all parts of the spectrum will try to use that strategy, to use that tactic to their own means and to their own success.
Is Trudeau trying to silence critics by calling that woman in Quebec a racist?
Oh, absolutely, he is. That's a very interesting one, because the group that woman came from is a group that is known for being a Quebec nationalist group. But the questions she had, I think, were quite reasonable. But then again, that's Trudeau for you. A leader who is set in his ways, and he's using his own tactics to divide and to try to squelch the conversation. The way that woman was handled as well by the police detail, seemed to be a little bit across the line as well. Of course, the Prime Minister deserves to have security detail to keep him safe and keep those safe who go to events. But she essentially came there with a loud voice and an inconvenient question. And why should a Canadian be treated that way? In that way, I think he could have handled it pretty well by asking the woman to talk to him later in a one-on-one basis instead of during the event. He could have handled it much differently. But he chose to handle it in such a way that I think backfired in many ways. We've seen that happen at a few of the events that he has held. He is, when you compare it to Stephen Harper, a little more open and welcoming and to engage people like that. And there seems to be more citizen access to events, but I think we're going to see that actually decline as we get closer to the election, because, of course, political parties like to do whatever they can to control the message and control the communications.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after the break.
I'm Greg Johnston, CEO of Carl Data Solutions, an industrial Internet of Things company that provides big data solutions for monitoring critical infrastructure. Carl Data offers machine learning and predictive analytics features through our cloud-based applications to deliver key asset-saving operational insights from massive amounts of data. Carl Data trades on the CSE symbol CRL and the pink symbol CDTAF. For more details on Carl Data, please visit carlsolutions.com.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, we always think of casinos as being cash cows for the government, but they don't always start off that way. You have concerns about the construction of the casino at the BC Place complex.
Yes, Park Casino. It's also got a couple of hotels attached. It's on the west side of BC Place Stadium. It's on land that is still owned by the government through BC Pavilion Corporation. It's leased by the companies that operate the Park Casino and the hotels, and this opened to great fanfare at the end of September last year after many years of controversy and delays. This casino was going to be, when it was proposed in 2011 to Vancouver City Council, was going to be one of the biggest in Canada. And there was quite a vociferous opposition. The Vancouver Not Vegas Coalition, which got together and brought evidence to City Hall, to City Council, that said that this cannot be allowed. City Hall at the time, City Council under Vision Vancouver and Mayor Greg Robertson came to a bit of a compromise. They agreed to allow the company to move its existing license across the street at that quota, which is 600 slot machines and 75 gambling tables, and not increase it as it had wanted by 2- and 3-fold. After a while, after a couple of years of more negotiations and lease renegotiation with the provincial government, they finally put the shovel in the ground and finally got it built. Very complex-looking building, and opened last September. And things aren't going the way that they had hoped it would be. Of course, there is a construction debt to pay. Don't downplay that. This was a project that was supposed to be $450 million, ended up being about $600 million. So they do have a debt to pay off, but they are not getting the business like they thought they would. There was, in the management discussion and analysis for Dundee Corporation, which is a 35% shareholder in the company that operates Park, they reported that the casino and hotel complex lost almost $81 million for the 6 months ending June 30th, and they said that the initial ramp-up of operations was slower than anticipated because of a number of factors, and they talked about regulatory costs and the business impact of the new anti-money laundering regulations that are applicable to all casinos, not just Park. And some of those came in December of last year. Those aren't necessarily harming all casinos in all ways. Some casinos are handling those better than others, but Park said that that was something that hampered their performance in the first 6 months of 2018. They lost $37.5 million in the first quarter of 2018, so the second quarter loss was even greater. They talked about in this management discussion analysis that startup costs for the complex, such as training, supervisory expenses, as well as the marketing costs, they had to spread the word that they were open, all came together and led to this net loss of almost $81 million over 6 months. They also had foreign exchange losses too, that they had gains in 2017 of about $17.4 million, but for the first half of 2018, more than $26 million. So this is a bit of a difficult time for them. They also had union negotiations for a new collective bargaining agreement, but they say that their expectations, they say, are encouraging, and they're forecasting improved results in the second and third quarters of the year, third and fourth quarters of the year, I should say, because of more tourism in Vancouver. We'll see if that does pan out for them. But the other interesting part of this is there was another cash infusion. About $33 million was put in to the company, and there could be more on the way. There could be more shortfalls that have to be plugged by the equity partners. And they say this, quote, "There can be no assurance that Park Vancouver will have access to revised financing on more favorable terms or at all, or that the corporation and its equity partners will have access to the necessary capital to fund any shortfalls. The corporation continues to carefully monitor its investment in Park Vancouver," end quote. So that's from Dundee Corporation, a major shareholder and major investor in the Park Casino at BC Place Stadium.
Now, I remember when Steve Wynn, the big gambling mogul, offered to build a 1,000-room hotel there, plus a casino, and he was turned down flat because they were worried about money laundering and his connections. It looks like that might have been a pretty good offer if you look back.
Yeah, that was an interesting idea to build the expansion to the Canada Place Convention Centre. It would have gone on the east side of Canada Place, north of Gastown, in an area where there years later was the proposal to build a soccer stadium. He was wanting to build the convention center and hotel complex for us in exchange for us giving him a casino license, because Steve Wynn pinpointed Vancouver and Boston as the two most lucrative areas in North America for casino expansion. And he was kind of forward-thinking, even though his idea got thwarted eventually, and the BC Liberals came to power on a promise to not expand gambling. Of course, well, we know where that promise went. He was a bit forward-thinking, because look what eventually did happen to British Columbia as a gambling market, and look at what happened to immigration patterns to British Columbia from Asia, as well as tourism patterns to British Columbia from Asia. This is, in many ways, Macau West, is what it's become for good, for bad, and for ugly. This is a bit troubling, because this is the downtown casino. This is what the Edgewater Casino became after leaving the Plaza of Nations last year, moving into this big complex, one of the most expensive real estate projects in BC in a number of years. It was supposed to help eventually pay the debt left by the roof replacement at BC Place Stadium. There's still many years left for it to do that, but it's not off to a very good start, especially a start that means that the lease payments for most of the first 3 years do not go to BC Pavilion Corporation, do not go to help pay that debt down. They actually go into the pockets of the Musqueam Indian Band, which negotiated an accommodation agreement in order to extinguish their land claim on that piece of land. This is going to require some deft stick handling, especially at a time when the government is under pressure because of the whole issue of money laundering at casinos, money laundering that does involve foreign money, tourists from China and immigrants from China who have used this as a means to clean dirty money, some of which could be connected to the real estate industry, some of which could be connected to the illegal drug trade. This will also require some marketing overhauls by Park itself. And this will also perhaps require some negotiations with their investors. There's been a lot of questions about Park going back to day one because of Paragon Gaming, the company out of Las Vegas, which is the operator, and in partnership with BC Lottery Corporation. This is a company that, even though it has some interesting pedigree, the principals of Paragon Gaming are relatives of the people that built the Circus Empire in Las Vegas. They do not have a strong record of operating many successful casinos. They have operated a casino in Alberta that had some financial problems. They, until recently, operated only really one small casino in Las Vegas before they became a management partner with some larger casinos in Las Vegas. And of course, they made this their flagship property, the Park Casino. This will be one to watch because I'm sure that there's a couple other companies that might want to jump on board here. And if Park ever decides to leave and sell its license, you do have Gateway Casinos and you do have Great Canadian Casinos, the two dominant companies that operate multiple properties here in BC with BC Lottery Corporation as the partner, and especially Great Canadian, which has expanded into Ontario and bought several licenses in Ontario with partners and with the approval of the Ontario government. Could they be waiting for further problems and further financial problems at Park and hoping to get in on that game?
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Vatic Ventures Corp. is a potash exploration company focused on the Korat Basin in Thailand, the world's largest undeveloped potash resource. Vatic's management has extensive potash exploration and development experience in Thailand. Vatic will have marketing advantage compared to Western producers. Drill program commences this spring. Vatic trades on the TSX Venture, symbol VCV, and on Frankfurt, symbol V8V2. Visit our website, vaticventures.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, your website, thebreaker.news, has raised some concerns about an NDP fundraiser. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we're talking a lot about proportional representation, and we're going to be talking a lot more of that, especially as we get closer to October 22nd, when we get the mail-in ballots and get to vote on whether we want to change the way we elect our politicians in BC. Well, there is someone in BC who is very friendly with the NDP, who's actually donated a small amount to the NDP over the years, who is actually going back to his homeland. According to reports out of Mexican media, El Universal newspaper reported that Napoleon Gomez Urrutia, who is the boss of Mexico's biggest mining union, is set to go home to Mexico to assume a seat in the Mexican Senate. Well, how did he get that seat in the Mexican Senate? The leader of the left-wing Morena party, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who won the presidential election in July, before that election happened, he submitted a list of candidates that he wanted to get into the Senate, and the way that those people would get into the Senate is if his party won enough votes, and then his party would get a proportion of the seats that are elected by proportional representation, And so they succeeded in getting enough votes and succeeded in getting some of those people on his list into the Senate, and one of those people is Napoleon Gomez Urrutia. Now, what complicates this is he came to Vancouver about 12 years ago. Back in 2006, he fled to Vancouver, left Mexico because he was fearing for his life and fearing for his liberty. He was accused of embezzling more than $55 million U.S. from members of his own union. Previously, there had been a trust account that had been collapsed, and that was money that was, from union dues, and he was accused by Mexican authorities of absconding with that money when he fled to Vancouver and has lived here for a number of years since then. Napoleon Gomez Urrutia fought that in court. He hired a lawyer. He resisted efforts by Mexico to extradite him. And a Mexican court eventually did decide that the extradition application was non-compliant, was illegal, and they threw that out of court. His case has never been actually taken to criminal trial, but there is a civil tribunal that handles labor relations complaints in Mexico that has decided earlier this year in favor of the miners that they should be compensated for more than $55 million plus interest after that account happened, and that was an adverse finding against the union. The Los Mineros is what they're called. But now Napoleon Gomez Urrutia is poised to return to Mexico with immunity and sit in the Senate after so many years of being in Canada and also being supported by the United Steelworkers Union and various other groups that are in the labor movement who believe that he was just being railroaded by corrupt corporate officials and corrupt government officials in Mexico. This is a very, very interesting and intriguing legal dispute. Napoleon Gomez Urrutia did write his memoirs back in 2013 called Collapse of Dignity, and in 2014 he was given Canadian citizenship. So he has apparently renounced his Canadian citizenship in order to return to Mexico to be a senator and to enjoy immunity. This is going to be interesting to see where this goes. There's still some in Mexico that believe he's a villain, and there's still some in Mexico that believe he's a hero, fighting for the rights of workers. It's a very interesting dispute, but again, this comes at a very intriguing time, at a time when the NDP government is giving us a chance to vote on a proportional representation on whether we want to have people appointed to the legislature in a similar fashion as Napoleon Gomez Urrutia is being appointed to the Senate in Mexico.
Non-elected people, in other words.
Yeah, non-elected people. There is the ability for unelected people to have positions of power in government right now. It is only a tradition that we have elected members of the legislature who become cabinet ministers, but there have been a few cases federally and provincially where the premier has appointed someone and put someone into cabinet who is actually not an elected politician, although the tradition is that if that does happen, then that person must run for election in the next available election. But happened here back during the NDP of the 1990s. It was Edward John, chief from a northern Aboriginal group, who was named the Children and Families Minister. He was plucked out of private life and put into cabinet, and he did run in the 2001 election and lost. And that's happened similarly on the federal level. So this is something that happens very rare, but it can happen. But it would happen more often if under a certain proportional representation system, a mixed member system, where the number of party votes would translate into the ability for a party leader to handpick someone who would sit in the legislature and become a lawmaker who would be chosen by the leader or chosen by the party, but not chosen by the people. So that's one of the formulas that British Columbians will have to decide if that's right for them when it comes to this mail-in ballot this fall.
Should the Knowledge Network be running programs right now, educating people on all the different options that will be available to British Columbians under the suggested things on the ballot?
I don't see why not. It should also include programming that says, the merits of first past the post. It should be looking at everything. Our provincial television network should be not getting involved in politics. It should be doing whatever it can to increase the understanding, of course. But then again, being the knowledge network, it's not available to everyone in British Columbia. It's one that a lot of British Columbians may not even know exists. So what difference will it make one way or another? Don't know.
Well, I do know they have great detective shows.
Yeah, they do. They sometimes show some of the great programming that's shown on PBS, some good music, and sometimes some British comedy, some great documentaries too. It's a fine addition to the media landscape.
Bob, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin. He's also the publisher of thebreaker.news, his website, thebreaker.ca. You're listening to The Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Any questions for our guests or for the show can be sent to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on The Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.